So I don't want to take a lot of your time. I want to get started, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nephi Khaliki, and I'll get him to start with his presentation.
Those of you that don't know, on March 5th of this year, I was arrested by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for fraud, for continuing to instruct CCW classes after my license had been revoked. What you don't know is that 2 weeks before that, I sued the Sheriff's Association and every sheriff in Nevada for fraud. 5 open cases against Metro and the Sheriff's Association. Not because I don't have any of the rights that I want, or I don't have enough guns, but I have everything I need. It's not about me. It's about you. And the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to lay out what is really going on and the reasons that they've attacked me since 2018, and the things that you need to watch out for that are happening in Nevada and you don't even know that they're happening. So if you can put the first slide up, I'm going to give you some history about where we are. In Nevada became a shall issue state in 1995. That means that if you qualify for a permit, they shall issue you that permit. Now, the sheriffs, they all were against it. All of our sheriffs were against it, and so was the Sheriff's Association, which is a lobbying group for those sheriffs. They pressed the interests of the sheriff's departments. They voted against it. They wrote letters against it. They spoke on the floor against it. They didn't want it. They said we were a bunch of weirdos, wackos, and perverts. Right? That's what the Sheriff's Association said about us. Well, it passed anyway. And then once it passed, the DMV originally was handling all the permitting. And that was kind of a mess in the organization. And then they were complaining about the sheriffs themselves weren't having consistent courses being taught. There was no uniformity. So in the very next legislative session in 1997, they came back to the table. And after they said we were weirdos, wackos, and perverts, all of a sudden they're like, we're here to help. We want to get involved. The sheriff's departments will all process the permits, the administration, all of the approvals and all of the paperwork, the red tape stuff. We'll handle it. No problem. And the Sheriff's Association says we'll create training standards so there's uniformity between all the different courses. But why the sudden change of heart? No. What changed their minds? It was that they should have went home and said, well, you know what? This is what we wanted. We didn't want it to happen, so it did happen. We should just sit down and shut up and respect that that's the law. That's not what they did. They repurposed their agenda, came back 2 years later and said, we're here to help. But the reason that they were there to help was not so they could facilitate permits, it's so they could control them. So you need to understand from law enforcement's perspective, they don't like guns out on the street that they don't know about. Right? That's their issue. That's officer safety. You know, we've heard that. Get out of the car and do all this other stuff for officer safety, which is really getting out of hand, but that's their mentality. They don't like guns in cars they don't know about. They don't like concealed weapons permits. They don't like guns at all. They want to be the only ones to have guns. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily not understandable, because from their perspective, you know, it's kind of like cheating, right? It's as long as they don't have any guns, I'm always going to win. And that's not what the law is. Officer safety can't trump your rights. They're supposed to work with us on these issues. And so that's how the sheriffs, they got involved. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. That's how all the sheriff's departments in the association got involved in concealed carry. So now the DMV wasn't handling it anymore. And we just talked about this stuff, that they just don't want us having permits and they were against it. That's the point, right? So go to the next slide, please. Same thing, permitting in Nevada, right? it's important to understand that when the association took over the curriculum, that will create training standards. NRS 202-3657 gave the association the authority to create training standards for CCW permitting. That's it. They didn't give them power to investigate. They didn't give them power to grant licenses or revoke licenses, to grant instructor licenses or instructor permits. In fact, they testified in front of the United States Senate that we're only going to certify contents of courses, not instructors. They lied to the state Senate. And now, if you look at their standards, they're holding hearings, investigations. They're getting private information about instructors from the police department, which is a violation of state law, right, to share police investigations with some civilian organization. Their overreach is just incredible, and which is what has happened to me. I've been suspended 4 times. I'm the most successful CCW instructor in Nevada history. I've held classes with 1,000 students. You were in one. We had 600 students. Every time I did it, they revoked my license, and I had to fight my way back 4 times. The first time it was 1,000 students, and they snuck some undercover in the class to say the class wasn't taught properly because the undercover snuck in 2 hours after we started. But he didn't get no paperwork. He didn't shoot and qualify. So what? He could have been the janitor. Like, these are stupid reasons to inconvenience and take $100,000 from our students. That's how much that is to apply, right? Well, they went down there, took my class, and then they went in. In my class, that first one we did was free. We did it for the victims of 1 October, and they attacked that class. And then they waited until everybody paid their $100, and then they nullified their permits. That's a jack move. That was Lombardo, right? They all were forced to retake it. And you know what? Every single one of them did with us. We call it the best 16-hour CCW class in Nevada history. Right? That's been our foundation. I've been all about my students ever since 2018 when I realized I had something very valuable to contribute to the training process. It's not just because I'm really good with a pistol. It's because I understand the criminal mindset and I have the ability to help other people understand it, because the number one role in self-defense is avoidance. It's not to just dive into it and start trouble. It's avoid it. See it coming before it happens. I'm the most highly rated CCW instructor. During the time I was allegedly teaching fraudulently, I got all 5-star reviews. So my issue is the standards. All right. The other time I got revoked was for telling a joke at that library, which is hilarious. Look it up. Gun safety for the races. It's a hilarious joke. I got suspended for telling these jokes. First Amendment, right? Every instructor tries to be funny. I mean, you've heard Jon Petrick come up here and try to tell jokes. They don't always land, right? But we try, right? I've got 8 hours to capture and hold the attention of people that are about to walk out on the streets with guns. I have to be interesting, I have to be engaging, and humor is a big part of that. But to lose my license and my livelihood over telling a joke, I don't care if you didn't find it funny. It's a fucking joke. I fought my way back, got reinstated from that. Then we had 2 students shot in Vegas at various ranges, including mine. Somebody had a negligent discharge, shot somebody else in the leg. But don't worry, the guy that got shot, he was from California. So I gave the other guy his money back and bought him lunch. See, jokes, funny. But there was another range that had an instructor accidentally shot a student in the head. And this is because we have all these thousands and thousands of new people, first-time shooters coming in, and they're taking the CCW class. This is not the appropriate place, but it's their right. Can't tell them no. So we have access to simunition, which is non-lethal ammunition. It's rubber bullets, has the same basic profile as like a 22 short, right? If I'm evaluating whether you can handle a pistol safely and adequately, I don't need to know how bad you destroyed the paper. I need to know that you can handle that weapon correctly and safely. So it doesn't need to be lethal. The standards that the association had put into place didn't say anything about it. Didn't say yes, didn't say no, and if it doesn't say nothing, well then that's called freedom. It's not prohibited, that means you can do it. And I wrote them a letter expressing my concerns. Somebody's going to die in one of these classes if we don't take some steps to make it safer. And guess what? They didn't even respond to that email. What did they do? They went and changed the standards quietly to prohibit it. So you couldn't use non-lethal ammo. And then revoked me knowing that I was using it. That's what got me revoked, apparently, allegedly, in last September. Well, I know that the Sheriff's Association doesn't have the authority to revoke my license. I wrote the Metro an argument back saying, no, you can't revoke my license. And they said, you're right, we're going to reinstate it. So they sent me a letter reinstating my license because the sheriff's the only one that can give it or take it. And then they said, well, the Sheriff's Association may have something to say about it anyway, but we're reinstating you. Well, then a few months later, the association goes through their process, says your license to instruct throughout Nevada is revoked. And I said, fuck you, you don't have the authority to revoke my license. You're a civilian organization that has no more power or authority than I do. And per statute, you write lesson plans. You're a little teacher. Go home and write your lesson plans and stay out of grown folks' business. That's what I said to them. And then I sued them for it. They used a state seal in their logo, which is a violation of state law. It's impersonating a government official. And then they have sheriffs and undersheriffs signing the letters as their official law enforcement title. This is on a civilian letterhead, signing it as undersheriff so-and-so or sheriff so-and-so. No. That's impersonating a government agency. They don't have any authority, and using the state seal and signing it as sheriff or whatever gives it the impression that it has weight, that it has merit. And I know that it doesn't. So I sued them for fraud. And 2 weeks later, they arrested me for fraud. Okay. Now, clearly that's retaliation. And that's fine because this fight needs to be fought. All this stuff needs to be brought to the table. And the bottom line, go ahead and shift this slide. The bottom line is their agenda and their problem with me. People ask me this all the time. I mean, dude, just chill out. And I'm like, I am chill. But I keep getting attacked for being successful. And so the reason that they keep attacking me and the reason they're after you is because their agenda is to control the permits. And my agenda is to blow them up. And so when you have a guy like me that's taken CCW permitting to the Tony Robbins level, nobody's ever done classes like we did at the library. Nobody ever in the country. They can't draw that kind of a crowd. So when you have somebody like that that's doing massive number of permits and their agenda is to suppress them, guess what? I'm in the way. But I'm not wrong. If every citizen in this county, in this state, wanted to get their permit, it's their goddamn right. My responsibility is to help them to do it safely, help them to do it better, help them to understand that their best course of action in self-defense is avoidance. That's my job. You having the permit doesn't mean you have to carry every day or you're always out there. But the problem is you have law enforcement and the sheriffs that are all colluding with the Sheriff's Association to secretly and quietly suppress your right to carry. It's a shall issue state, and that's not what they're doing. Go ahead and shift the slide. So we discussed that. They don't have the authority. They were only given the ability to create standards. Now, the interesting thing about this statute, and it's the other thing I sued them for, it's called a writ of mandamus. There's two ways you can get your permit. One is by taking a sheriff-approved course that must follow the standards of the Sheriff's Association. That's the first one, subsection or subparagraph 1. But there's a second one. Subparagraph 2 says, through a law enforcement agency, college, university, or national organization that certifies instructors in firearm safety, or the Concealed Carriers Union, which is, we started unionizing concealed carriers 4 years ago. And we're already bigger than the Culinary Workers Union. Nobody fucking listens to me, right? The strongest group that we have in this state as a voting bloc are concealed carriers. They will never, ever waver or falter on that key through line issue. If we just unify that group, I've told the party, I've told all kinds of people, look, the union. And Democrats don't know how to say anything about it because they don't know how to pronounce fuck the union. Right? It's beautiful. The news won't even cover it. We're larger than Harry Reid's machine. And that's very key to us claiming those rights back and ensuring that these kind of things don't happen. Right? So the union can certify instructors, because that's what we are, as a training organization that provides support for concealed carriers. And so I filed my renewal for my CCW permit. And of course, Metro said, what the hell is this? Sent it back, rejected. It has to be this Sheriff Association form. And I go, nope, you're sued, because that's not the law. The law says 2 paths. Union can do it. Other organizations that on a national level can do it as well. But they try to pretend like it doesn't exist. We don't need the Sheriff's Association to approve our fucking courses. There's only 2 things that you have to demonstrate to get your permit. That's competence with a handgun, and that you've been instructed in the use of firearms and relative to the laws in our state. There's no rule that it says it has to be 8 hours, or that it has to be in person, or that it has to be at the range, or it can't be lethal. This is all made up shit. That the association, they're free to create their standards, but guess what? Option number 2, union, we can do it how we want to. And they know I'm pushing for it, so what do? They mess with me. They try to put me in jail and try to interrupt me, mess up my finances, ruin the best brand in CCW in the history of Nevada, Vegas CCW. Nobody's done better than we have in that. 87 points below me is my first competitor. I was forced to sell VegasCCW.com to Range 702 because they have just attacked me relentlessly, and the lawsuits are going to keep coming. But it's very important, switch to the next slide, that you understand, keep going. One more. Okay. Nobody will go through the trouble of entering the data that you get from the state police every month for years because they don't really want to publish the information. Now, gun sales in this country, they've gone up exponentially in the last several years. They've steadily been climbing since COVID. And CCW permitting follows 6.6%. So if gun sales are up here, they're following CCW permits and gun sales. A certain percent, 6% of the people that buy a gun are going to go out and get a permit. We know that as a national statistic. So when I started cramming all this information about all of these are the top, counties. You look at Clark County, look at the pattern, look at it in groups of 3s. It starts to peak and then boom, boom, boom. There's a culling that happens. Peaks again, boom, boom, boom. Another culling. peaks again, right? They start having that. Do you know how many permits we gained in 2023 in Clark County? 1,300. I do more than that. How are we losing more permits than we're gaining when gun sales are going this way? How are permits going that way? So I started asking myself, what are they up to? What are the potential ways that they can do it? And you could look at these other trending, right? We have Douglas County that's starting to peak up, and then what happens? This stuff's getting out of control. Let's chop some off. The question that we're here to answer is, how are they doing it? How are they chopping them off? There's 5-year permits. It's the number one demographic in America. CCW permit holders are 100 times less likely to commit a crime than cops. This is a statistic in a study that came out recently. We're the cleanest bunch in the country. So, next slide. This is Clark County. So you have 304,000 permit holders. Then it goes up, chops it down, goes up, chops down, goes up, chops it down. It shouldn't be like that. We should be at 211,000 permits per capita for Clark County. What are these chop marks in the graph? What are they coming from? Next slide, please. You see that in Washoe County, it starts to have a spike, and what happens? Bam! Within a month, they're dropped back down to what they feel is an acceptable number. That means that they're making CCW permits a raffle, that you have to be in a certain 1% of the population or you're just getting chopped off the top. Next slide. These are all of them together, and you see they all have the same pattern. Somebody's applying an algorithm to permitting because they look like a haircut, right? It should be random all over the place. You should have pretty flat lines in rural communities because they don't grow that fast, right? And then Clark County should just be one trend up that follows gun sales by 6.6%. But it's not what's happening. Every time there's a peak, there's a culling. A peak, a culling, a peak, a culling. Next slide, please. If you look 7 months out of the year, last year, we lost more permits per month. 7 months out of the year, we're losing permits. Anything that's in blue, we're gaining. But all those reds, that's our numbers going down. And we only had a net gain of 1,200 permits in a population of 2.5 million people. Something's not right. Next slide, please. So we talked about this, that there's 2 paths for you to get your permit. You don't need to go through the Sheriff's Association. You could go through the Concealed Carriers Union, right? Only have to fulfill 2 requirements, handgun proficiency and gun laws. Not that you don't need more than that, but that's the law. They'll pretend like that second one doesn't exist, and that's what we have in court right now. We're suing them. Next slide, please. Right? Law enforcement agency, the reason they left this statute in there, that paragraph 2, that you could get your permit through a law enforcement agency, is so that sheriff's departments didn't have to have their officers go through 8 hours of training to get their permits. They left that loophole open for themselves. And this is what they get, because I'm reading the law correctly. If it's a sheriff-approved course, then the sheriff can approve it based on the standards of the association. But if it's not, if it's paragraph 2, they have 0 say in it. They can't say, all they got to do is, this is from the union. Thank you, accept it, process the permit. They can't question it. They can't say nothing about it. They can't tell we don't like this. Go fuck yourself. There's nothing they can say about it because that provision specifically only applies to paragraph 1. Next slide, please. So how are the different ways that they can eliminate? You could do people who get warrants, but we know that's not the case because this is a clean demographic. Failure to renew. They don't remind you when your permit's about to expire, so most people have a lapse at the end of their permit because they just forget. Utah, they'll send you a notice. Hey, you better hurry up and renew, right? Dispensary records. Next slide. The federal rules of civil procedure, right? Government authority may obtain financial records under Section 3402 only if it obtains a search warrant pursuant to federal rules. The government's not supposed to know about your use of marijuana. It's private, right? It's medical records. Dr. John's going to talk about HIPAA. Next slide. This is a letter that I got from a student. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't believe her at first. She called me and she said, the sheriff's department called me and says that my debit card showed up at a dispensary record, and now I'm a prohibited person. She got her permit denied, and she said that please be advised, this denial federally prohibits you from owning or possessing firearms. She's a 75-year-old little black woman whose husband smokes weed, and they have a joint checking account. And I didn't believe her because I know that the police department can't be blatantly violating state law and obtaining these records. A, you need a warrant to look at those records, and B, it's protected, the privacy protected. So they can't be that blatant about this. So I asked myself, and then she got that letter, and it was vague. The letter's vague. They told her debit card use in the phone. In the letter, they put into writing, you're a prohibited person. Yeah, bye-bye to your gun rights. They took her gun rights away from her because her husband used the debit card. Well, wait a minute. Aren't dispensaries cash only? So I looked into that. And somebody told me that some guy was bragging about being the only dispensary serving ATMs, cashless ATMs. So you go in to buy the weed. They don't take anything but cash. There's an ATM machine right there that doesn't spit out cash. It just pushes it to the account of that merchant. So I looked at their statutes. Next slide. So I looked at their statutes. This is a conversation between her and I'm trying to investigate in favor of the department. Did you answer yes on question 17 about marijuana use? She said, I would never. I don't. So I honed her in on, I didn't say I did. There's only one question that relates to that. And she said her husband did because he has glaucoma, but not her. That doesn't prove use. So next slide. Now somebody's going to be very mad at me. Because this company called the Transaction Group. So I looked into the statutes for automatic teller machines. And they're required to capture customer information, banking account, amount of transactions, and the location of the machine. Now, this company, the Transaction Group, was the only one that was providing it at that time for the dispensaries. Pretty simple to find out that this company is the only way. Next slide. This is the statute that says that the type of account to or from which the money is transferred, a number or code that identifies the customer, the account number, or to the device used to access the electronic terminal, location of the terminal, name of each third party for whom money is being transferred. And guess what? No privacy restrictions in that statute. Next slide. So we're calling them bait TMs, like a bait car. People are going into these dispensaries. They're using the ATM machine, thinking their information is safe by state law. And then that company, the companies that are providing those ATM machines are snitching to the government, telling them, here's a list of people that use these dispensary cashless ATMs. And then when they want to get rid of some permits, they take that list compare it to the CCW permit list, and they find the people that are in common, send them that letter. That's the only thing that could explain that level of decimation of permits. How else could somebody get the information that you used your debit card other than the debit card company? You know how many marijuana users there are in the country? 8.3 million people getting fucked out of their rights because they want to light a plant on fire. And I don't mess with weed. Everybody knows me, knows I'm a hookah guy. I don't mess with weed. I don't like how it smells, and I don't even know what beer tastes like. I'm just not into none of that stuff. But you know who's being most affected by that? Next slide, please. Just so you can see it in a graph. You go to the dispensary, you scan your ID, right? And then you either use a debit card or cash. If you use cash, privacy laws protect that information from being released or disseminated. But if you go and you use your debit card, transaction groups snitch on you, you get one of those letters. You lose your gun rights and your permit. It's the only thing that could account for that. And that's 8.3 million people a year getting tricked out of their gun rights. And guess who's affected most? Blacks, minorities, and veterans. And I would much rather, next slide, that people were smoking a plant that grows naturally than some chemicals or psychotropic drugs. And now it's a $7 billion industry. Cashless ATMs for dispensaries, it's a $7 billion industry that we could shut down right now by just telling the weed community to pay cash, cash, cash. That's it. That'll shut that shit down inside of 90 days. It will dry up like our economy dried up back in 2009. And my issue with that is that we have all these collaborators. They did it during COVID. Businesses were enforcing these unconstitutional policies and statutes with leverage over your families and your paychecks because the government knew they couldn't do it. So what do? They find these Nazi collaborators to enforce all these bullshit policies and agendas. And now we have companies out there actively snitching on citizens to strip them of their gun right. They're stripping them from little old ladies. Well, something happened to her. They don't care who it is. They just want to reduce those numbers by any way they can. Next slide, please. This is that son of a bitch. His name is Dana Michael Seraldo. According to him, he's the first person in Nevada to offer the ATM services, cashless ATM services to Nevada dispensaries. And these companies are worth $7 billion for being snitches. There is only one way that information can get out. It's from them. Next slide, please. Number one, you can't read it that well for some reason. Anyone know what the fastest growing demographic for weed use is?
What group of people?
Yeah. No answers from white people, please. Black folks. That's culture. That's like me with a hookah, right? The African Americans account for most of the marijuana use. And then you can't read it here. The second demographic is also minority, right? I guess white people prefer meth. I don't know. That's a joke. It's a joke, right? It's a joke. Fucking A. Number one growing demographic for gun ownership in America is black Americans. Maybe they got my memo that if people are pissing you off in the world, get a fucking gun. I'm Afghan. If people were fucking with me, you can guarantee I'm going to start stocking up on ammo. I'm not going to be an oppressed person. Russia tried that shit, and that didn't work out too well. I believe in the Second Amendment. If you're being abused, trust me, there ain't no Gandhi in this situation that's going to get you out of it. You have to be able to defend yourself, whether it's from criminals or from whatever other threat is compromising you. So remember this, 90% of retailers saw a surge in gun sales to African Americans, 90%. Next slide. You're going to be here in a second. The reason, remember, go back to the beginning of this conversation where they're not for permitting. They don't want people out there with their permits because they want to control those permits. If you don't think they want you out there with a bunch of guns that they don't know about, how much do you think that would apply to minorities? And yeah, I'm suggesting that their calling of the permits is racist. And it makes sense because I translated the test into 4 different languages and gave it to the association for free. And you know what they did? They trashed it. I created software so that they could monitor the progress of these paper-written tests so that they could improve it. They threw it in the trash. They didn't care. I offered to make it safer for nobody would be shot in a class and lose their life unnecessarily. And what they do, they change the standards and then try to revoke my license. Why? Does it have anything to do with the fact that all of our sheriffs in Nevada are white? Maybe. Maybe. Racism does exist. I was hoping that wouldn't be part of it. But who's the ones that are most affected by this? You have to look at actions speak louder than words, right? Minorities are being more affected by suppression of CCW permitting than any other group. Why didn't they want them to have the test in Mandarin, in Tagalog, in Spanish? Why didn't they want it? It doesn't matter if you're qualified to own a firearm because you are a citizen. Just because you don't have to speak English to have citizenship. A lot of people have been here 20 years, still can't speak for shit, except to their relatives. Do we want them to better understand their responsibilities as a gun owner by providing it in their own language? We do it for the DMV, and people still out there driving like shit. But we want people to understand their responsibilities, and if it means just a simple thing of changing it into their own language so they get it and are not a liability out on the street carrying a firearm and they don't know what's what, of course that makes sense, right? I did all the work. I paid for it to get translated, and once it was done, it was done. It's 50 questions. Why trash it? I'm just saying. Whatever the motivations are, the groups that are being most adversely affected by those choices, by those algorithms and those policies and their secret policies are mostly minorities. That's what I sued them for, is violating preemption law. When they changed the standards so that I couldn't use non-lethal ammo, they were attempting to redefine ammunition. So I sued them for that because that violates state preemption law. Now if somebody's doing it, I am all about suing their asses. I have gotten more done by suing their asses than I have by all the memes I've put out there about Creepy Joe and or whoever else is involved in our gun control stuff. Death by 1,000 memes, right? Suing the shit out of them, that works. Right? And I've done it 5 times pro se. If we find areas where they're violating laws, go after them. I will. I'm not scared of nobody. Right? It's too late now. I mean, you arrested me, stuck my bad hair day photo all over the fucking news, and what do you got now? You got nothing. So now we're going to talk about the issues and the reasons why they're not attacking me as much as they're attacking what I'm doing, contradicting their objectives, and that is to suppress permits. They think this is an acceptable number of permits for Clark County per capita, and when it starts to climb up, we're going to chop it down. And that is unacceptable. That is violating constitutional rights systemically. I don't care if they're black, white, brown, or whatever they are. That's wrong. It's wrong. You take advantage of the training facilities we have and offer courses for people at police departments and work with them. It's supposed to be a partnership with the community. My ass. I've proposed several programs to help provide that. They will provide hope for prisoners, and they have a graduation every couple of months For all the people that graduated the program that were in prison just recently, I want them to care about concealed carriers as much as they care about hope for prisoners. It's the same side of it's two sides of the same coin. Why don't they care about you guys that much? They want to give you a fucking certificate because you graduated prison, but they don't want to work. They haven't had an instructor meeting in 10 years, not even through COVID. No updates, no changes to the standard. The only times they've changed the standards is to specifically target me. I want to bring Jon up to talk about HIPAA, because this is a whole nother area, and there's things coming out now that are even beyond what I originally planned to talk about, in the different ways that you have to be careful. But when it comes to laws that are being used to secretly and quietly strip you of your gun rights, they're out there. And the next one past weed is your medical records. So with that, I'm going to bring Jon Petrick.
Thank you. You can tell he's pretty serious about this issue, right? When we were talking about it, if you don't know, I'm a physician. I've been a physician in Las Vegas for 25 years. And when Nephi and I were having a conversation about this issue, I said, well, it's a HIPAA violation, and that's your HIPAA rights. If you don't know, in 1996, we formed what's known as the HIPAA laws, and it's your privacy, that your medical records should stay private. And we ultimately started talking about this because there's a bill that was passed, AB 7, Assembly Bill 7. If you don't know what it is, it's a mandate that's going to require all doctors to store all of their medical records on a central server. I want to point out the problem with this. One, I'm a small practitioner, and there are single family doctors out there that just have one practitioner, one front desk staff, one doctor. And what they're going to do is they're going to make them require that every single time a patient has a record that they upload that to that mainframe computer. You can look it up. It's AB 7. And I look at that as a bad thing, because what just happened to MGM? They were hacked. What happened to Clark County School District? It was hacked. T-Mobile, hacked. And not only are you saddling with these small practitioners with this extra expense, where now they have to find somebody who is technologically savvy to enter all this data, it leaves our data susceptible. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my mechanic to know about my records. I don't want my daughter's beautician to know about her medical records. And that's what this violation comes down to. So when I was talking to Nephi, I said, this is terrible if you use your debit card and you have a medical marijuana card, and you go and you may not have cash on you, and you go and you use that debit card, and now they find out that they can take away, because of that condition, that you now get your medical card, they can now take your permit. Well, that's okay. Okay, it's weed, right? Maybe it's still got that negative connotation, but what happens later on down the road if it's not the dispensary? What if it's the CVS and you've been prescribed Prozac or Zoloft or Xanax, and now they deem for the greater good that you're now a risk, and now they can start to pull your permit for these other drugs, even though they're prescribed by a physician, because the medical marijuana card says that a doctor is prescribing you, and your pharmacy is a dispensary. It's legal, it's honorable, and you can do it. So you can see this is actually what's known as a Fourth Amendment violation, which is an illegal search and seizure. 1996, when we established HIPAA, it was trying to make sure that all of our privacy was going to be protected. In 2005, they ratified it and made it a little stronger. And now in 24, you can see now what they're trying to do is they're trying to circumvent our Second Amendment right and start to pull these permits. So when I was talking to Nephi, I said, Nephi, you can see how these dominoes are going to fall. And as a physician, I'm vehemently opposed to anybody that's going to try to violate your HIPAA rights. And this is an issue that I find is terribly, terribly offensive. If any physician out there will tell you, it's hard enough to get patients to fill out all your rights, and now they're going to make a mandate requiring me to tell everybody that comes in and gets a legal marijuana medical card, I'll have to put that on a mainframe computer. And then if you use your debit card at any of those dispensaries or eventually CVS's or Walgreens or any of that, you're going to be susceptible. And we were talking about it, and I said, what's next? What happens if it's not necessarily just, what happens if you don't necessarily have a prescription? What happens if your records are out and they start pulling all kinds of rights? We hear about them now with the carbon footprints. We hear about them with the digital currency. So you can see where this is going, and it really gets bad when you start to realize that under the Fourth Amendment, they're going to try to use the Fourth Amendment to take away your Second Amendment. And I said the very first time I was up here that if we don't have that Second Amendment, you can't protect any of the rest. So that's kind of my part in this. I encourage you all, to Nephi's point, is educate yourself. If you don't think this is happening, it's already happening. You just saw the citation that was written, and you saw the permit that has just pulled. We get things across our desk from a medical standpoint of how we now have to mandate. And it's happening. This just passed. AB 7 passed. It's not as if it's a pipe dream or it's something bad. It just passed. So I'm fighting this. This is one of those that, I'm not, anti anybody. I'm not anti-sheriff. I'm not anti-governor. I'm not anti-assembly. I'm just saying that we need to pay attention to the rules and what we're signing into law. You can't just play along to get along anymore. We need legislators out there that are looking at the Constitution. If you go to my website, under Dr. John for Nevada, I narrated the entire Nevada Constitution. It's on there that we can all use it as a tool so that you know your rights. And I encourage everybody, you got to learn the federal Constitution, because if I didn't understand the HIPAA and I didn't understand the Fourth Amendment, I wouldn't know that they were coming for my Second Amendment. And it is, and it's happening. So that's kind of my piece of the evening. If anybody has any questions on that, I'd love to stick around after and chat with you guys, because I see this as a physician every day. I see it. I feel it. I have patients who come in, and I don't blame patients for not wanting to fill out their paperwork, especially when you find out how they're going to use it against you. So just keep that in mind. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce one of someone who really, has stood alone for so long out there. Sheriff Mack has been such an inspiration to all of us, especially for everybody that's pro 2A. So for the record, you couldn't find more a 2A person than Sheriff Mack, and I'd like to introduce him, please.
Thank you. Thank you, sister. It's always good to bring your sister to these things. No. Good to see you. I got really fundamental about my belief in America and the Second Amendment. And there was a time, most of my adult career has been centered around law enforcement. And I was a cop for 11 and a half years, and that was in Utah. And I moved home to Arizona and ran for sheriff. And I didn't even want to do that. But my wife's parents, and when your life's going really good, it never fails. The in-laws call. When everything's going great, the in-laws call. And they wanted me to move home and run for sheriff, and my wife kept telling them to leave me alone. We didn't want to do that. And some epiphany happened to both my wife and me while we were telling her parents no. And we both knew that's what we were supposed to do. And we moved home and ran for sheriff. And I ran on a very constitutional platform because I'd started reading and studying the Constitution as a rookie cop. And so my second term, my wife, I just got elected about 8 months before this. And my wife and I were watching TV, and we saw Bubba. Who's Bubba? President Clinton. We saw him signing the Brady Bill into law, and he used 13 pins with his left hand. I don't know why he did that, but I can't remember, but he did. And we really got interested watching what was going on because it was just kind of funny. And he was signing the Brady Bill into law. And there's some people who say that if a law is contrary to the Constitution, it's no law at all. And I actually believe that. The founders actually called it pretended legislation. And that's right in the Declaration of Independence. They were the 27 complaints that the founders had about why we're separating from England. That was in there because they do pretended legislation. And so I didn't really have a heart attack about the Brady Bill that night. Okay, it's a waiting period and it's going to make everybody safe. But Clinton said this. He said, the Brady Bill will make America so safe that even our nation's police won't need to carry guns anymore. I know. So that's what he said, and I go, man, I want to party with this guy. He's funny. And then on January 21st, 1994, and yes, at the time I was the youngest sheriff in the state of Arizona, 3 agents of the BATF. If there's any of you who don't know that acronym, then you better get educated. And you better buy these books, because this is the best Second Amendment education you could get anywhere. Both of these books. You got to get these books. I've dedicated my life to preserving the Second Amendment. And I put most of those beliefs and documentations in these 2 books. From My Cold Dead Fingers, Why America Needs Guns. And this was born out of my lawsuit. My motivation to suing the federal government was to preserve the Second Amendment. But we did not sue on the Second Amendment, even though the NRA was backing me in this lawsuit. I called the NRA because I didn't know what to do, but I said, I'm going to sue the federal government. And they go, well, we've already been working on this case, and we've been praying that you would call, Sheriff. And I said, I'm not even a member of the NRA. Why? You don't even know me. He goes, we needed a sheriff, and you were the first one to call. I said, wonderful, let's do it. He says, well, we're suing on the 10th Amendment, not the 2nd. Said we're going to protect the 2nd through the 10th. And the 10th is where states' rights come into play. And you really want to focus on getting freedom back, county by county and state by state. Want me to tell you why? Because there's no hope for freedom in Washington, D.C. That's why. Find another solution. And so I believe I formed this organization. And I've been trying to teach sheriffs that they are to never violate your constitutional rights. And if some federal or state agent comes into your county and they want to try to violate your rights, the sheriff should stand in the way and stop it. And that's just all there is to it. And so the first book I ever wrote was this one, From My Cold Dead Fingers, Why America Needs Guns. And then this one got even more fundamental in a lot of ways, because it both of them deal with the intent. What was the intent of the Founding Fathers when they promulgated the Second Amendment? And I'll bet you there's some of you who don't know. But look at the entire Bill of Rights. What was their intent in developing and promulgating the Bill of Rights? And why did it take them 2 years after they did the original Constitution to add the Bill of Rights? Well, it was a mistake. And some of the founders went to Madison and said, we made a mistake. And Madison said, we prayed. We blood, sweat, and tears put into that Constitution. What are you talking about, Patrick? And Samuel says, does it have a Declaration of Rights in it? And Madison went, we made a mistake. And he called everybody back. And they developed the Magna Carta of that day. You remember the Magna Carta? It was year 1215. And the people developed a list of rights. If we were to get together right now, let's make this meeting where we make a list that declares our rights as a people. Let's list the civil rights that government can never violate right now. Well, that's what they did in 1215. That's what they did in 1650, the rights of Englishmen. That's what they did in 1789 about the Declaration of Independence, but the Bill of Rights. We don't have a Declaration of Rights that government can never touch or violate. Do you know how many they came up with? 189. We'd probably do the same, or more. But they saw that there was overlap, and they dwindled them down to 12. And the states ratified 10. Now, of those 10, how many How many rights? How many specific rights are in it? For instance, how many are number 1? 5. How many are number 2? There's actually 2. The militia, the right to have a militia, it doesn't say right, but it says a well-regulated militia is necessary for what? The security of a free state or a free government. Amen. And because of that, that's why we the people cannot be disarmed, because we are the militia.
That's right. Amen.
And that's what government doesn't get. And then, of course, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, because we're the militia. You know what the Second Amendment guarantees? Our right to rebel. Because if we're disarmed, you're going to be very good at rebelling? No. Yeah, back to pitchforks and whatnot. Didn't work very good. So the intent of the Founding Fathers was that the Bill of Rights, and there's about 27, 28 total. Like in number 6, there's like 8 or 9. And that's your due process rights. And there could be 4, and it depends on how you count them. Because number 8 has 4. No excessive fines or bail. Is that 1 or is that 2? So it just depends on how you count them. And cruel and unusual punishment. Well, cruel and unusual, is that 1 or 2? So there's about 27, 28, or 29 rights that are guaranteed that government cannot touch. And you know what I think is touching the Second Amendment pretty bad? Concealed carry permits. And he was talking about it, and I'm telling you, they don't have any authority to do it. And we've gone along with it. And I will say, even gun owners of America who doesn't compromise, who lives on the motto of not compromising, they compromise on that and said, yeah, it's better to have a permit than to have them come and arrest you just because you're carrying a gun. And we've been involved in that before. And we had a good sheriff out in Liberty County, Florida, undo an arrest of one of his deputies because all he had was a gun in his pocket. And he got arrested because he didn't have a permit. And the sheriff said the Second Amendment has to count for something. And he actually testified. That was when he took the stand in it. They arrested the sheriff. They did. His name was Nick Finch from Liberty County no less. And so again, I really want to push the books. And if you want the books, I mean, you got to have the books. You got to want the books. So whatever you want to donate to get them, I want you to have them. And it's so vital and vitally important that you get this education. We've got to know what the Second Amendment is and where it came from and why it happened and how absolutely vital it is to individual liberty. And how many slaves were allowed to own guns?
To use them.
And is there a message there? Is there a message there to us all? When you get this book, George Mason said, "I asked, sir, what is the militia?" And that quote is in here. I asked her, what is the militia? It is the whole body of the people. The best and most effectual way to disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. Right. Enslave them. So they're all doing it. Now, folks, I really liked what Nephi had up there. And I'm telling you right now, one of the reasons that the current administration wants to have a digital currency, get rid of the dollar, get rid of all cash, get rid of your coins, that big jug you have of coins, not going to do you any good. But I really loved what the candidate that's on trial right now and waiting for the jury to consider his future, that he said he will, when he was talking to recently, he said that I will not allow the digital currency to happen. Amen. That should tell you a lot right there. Man, oh man. Because I'll tell you how dangerous that is. They're doing it to keep track of us.
That's 100%.
And you want me to tell you something about the concealed carry permits? they share them with Interpol. You know what Interpol is? International Police, Interpol. And I had a friend that tried to go into Canada. And they said, "Did you bring your gun?" And he goes, "No, you don't allow guns in Canada." I said, "Why did you think I brought my gun?" He said, "Because you're a concealed carry permit holder." Wow. And he told him the state. And so when Nephi says they share them, they share that information, they share the information. So it's not just registering your gun, it's registering you. That's right. And we've got to start taking a stand, and we've got to get serious about liberty, because the Second Amendment is that. Yeah. And do you know how many gun control laws there are in America? Too many to count, is because it's over 20,000. 20,000. And you'll get that in here in both books. And this lady that I met when I was inducted into the NRA Hall of Fame, she was there, and we became such good friends. My wife and me, and her daughter and her. And I went to visit them in Washington, D.C. when I was back there for some event. I can't remember what it was. But my daughter and I went and had dinner at her home. And we called her Mama. And she was a beautiful lady that absolutely touched our lives. And she has since passed away, but her story is in this book. And the chapter title is "Mama Shot Them." Because you've got to read that. But she had a boyfriend that took off, I guess, and left her, but he left his gun in the home. And you're not allowed to have a gun in the home in Washington, D.C. That's against the law. It was a felony. So yeah, they've kind of changed it since then, but it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says about it. They still arrest you for having a gun there. And so her daughter was a witness to a crime, and she was waiting to go to trial, and she was under protection a little bit, but they weren't very good at it, and they didn't really care a lot. So 2 thugs break into their home, and they're going to burn the home down, and they're going to kill everybody inside. Well, Mama remembered that gun, and she'd never shot a gun before in her life, and she shot both of them, and one of them died. And all the good people went to bed in their home that night. And the 2 bad guys, one went running off, and he got arrested because he was bleeding to death, and he lived, and the other one was killed. And you got to see that. It's so powerful. But friends, I sued to stop gun control. And there's something that you don't know. This is the Brady Bill, okay? And the Brady Bill, like I said earlier, was the first time in American history that a pretended legislation law from Washington, D.C. commandeered the office of sheriff to enforce federal law. And they threatened to arrest us if we failed to comply. I'm not making that up. It's in the review. This little review of the case talks about and explains this Brady Bill provision. You tell the sheriff he has to do this for you, that you're going to enforce the Brady Bill for us. No money attached, no carrot on a stick thing about that, any of that, but we'll threaten to arrest you if you don't do it. And we were looking at a year in jail or $10,000 fine or both. And a couple of sheriffs from across the country, after it came out publicly that I was going to sue them, there's one sheriff from Nebraska called and said, "I'm not going to do it. I'm not joining your lawsuit, but I'm not going to enforce it either. If they want to come and arrest me, tell them to come ahead." I said, "Well, that's what I wanted every sheriff to do. We shouldn't have to sue. Right. Just tell them no. If the sheriffs of this country had just told them no, the Brady Bill would have been gone, and there's not a damn thing they could do about it. Nothing." And so, extremely valuable, important decision. And I'll give you one of these. And they only sell for $2 anyway. But you have to realize that the Brady Bill was an experiment. Kind of like COVID-19 was an experiment. Okay? They wanted to know how many sheriffs would go along. They wanted to know in COVID how many of us would just fall in line and we would accept this because, as long as they're taking care of us and they're saving our lives, then they can do anything they want. And they did. So the first thing you have to understand, in 1994 is when I filed this lawsuit, and the president was Clinton. Folks, do you see it there? I sued the Clintons and lived to tell about it. Yeah. So back to this whole thing about the dangers of letting the federal government take us into a digital currency. Is we get followed at what Nephi was talking about. They're going to keep track of every single little thing we do. In the meantime, folks, make sure you use cash to get your medical marijuana. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I grew up never using it. I'm kind of like Nephi. I never use marijuana, except when, and you guys need to, you can't see this very good. Can you see that? Can you see that? So that guy and this guy are all the same guy. That's me when I was undercover. And what a horrible time. So now I have to smoke marijuana and cigarettes and drink beer. And I didn't drink beer growing up either, and I hated beer with a passion. And I said, God, please let me find a beer that tastes okay so I'm not gagging when I'm talking to people about buying pot from them and meth and cocaine and stuff. And so I kept experimenting with all the beers out there. There had to be one that tasted okay. Look at all these stupid commercials. These beers are great. And I hated them.
So which is the one?
Hams. Hams.
Oh, Hams?
And that's hardly sold anywhere. The hams went down the easiest. Rhonda, I hated that. I hated drink. And I can't inhale cigarettes, so I had to fake it. I can inhale marijuana, but I cannot inhale cigarettes. My virgin lungs wouldn't take it, And so, also when I was in the middle of this lawsuit, and 6 other sheriffs from across the country joined me in the lawsuit, and I was really grateful for that. They really made it go to the Supreme Court because the first 2 of us were both in the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit, we lost. Yep. Okay, because they're not going to do anything constitutional in San Francisco. But the Fifth Circuit, where the Texas sheriff and Louisiana sheriff filed, they went and they won. So we had conflicting circuit courts on the same case. Mm-hmm. And you know that's going to guarantee a trip to the Supreme, and that's what happened. And so Sheriff Prince and I were at the Supreme Court. And for this small town, southeastern Arizona boy, that was awesome. And Scalia wrote the decision, and he did something amazing. He took us through a history lesson. He didn't try to do anything new. And it wasn't about politics, and it wasn't about political agendas. It was about the history of America. And he even says that in his introduction to the case. We're going to look at this from a historical perspective. And that's why this decision is so powerful. It's one of the most powerful decisions in the history of our country, but it was the most powerful 10th Amendment decision by far since the beginning of time, since the beginning of America's time. And so I've got a lot of this memorized. It really strikes a blow against all the things that happened during the COVID-19. How about this one? But the Constitution protects us from our own best intentions. What would that have done to COVID if we'd have just adhered to that? And there's many of them in there that are even better. So I really like also one other quote from this one. I got to tell you real quick. He ran for president. His name was Alan Keyes. And he was debating McCain and Bush one time when all three of them were still in the race in the Republican primary. And they were talking about all this stuff, and Keyes got really upset with him, and he told him this. He said, the only difference between today's slavery and the slavery of the Old South is that at least the plantation owners paid for the chains. You see, folks, we pay for them ourselves today. And all this ridiculous spending and the wasteful spending and the tax, borrow, and spend, tax, borrow, and spend, tax, borrow, and why the states keep going along with that is just, to me, just so ludicrous. And we are sovereign. And it says in here that the states retained an inviolable sovereignty. And we have got to use that to do what? Protect the sovereignty of the individuals in our states. And Nevada has the dubious honor of geographically being owned by the federal government more than any other state in the union. Ridiculous. It's absurd. Of course, Arizona's not too far behind. But we're about 70%, you're about 90%. And so it's ridiculous. We have got to become sovereign, and this will really bless your lives also. The Second Amendment is something that I've taken very seriously, and I will say another thing I wanted to say that Nephi brought up, and that the sheriffs all support gun control laws. And their associations usually come out whenever there's a gun control law. These law enforcement officers come out and support gun control laws as if that's going to make them safer. And tactically speaking, as a former peace officer, and patrol officer, and sheriff, tactically speaking, as a peace officer, what in the hell are you thinking that you would support gun control laws? What, is that going to make you safer? When you go to a family fight, you're going to relax because there's no way they could have a gun because the gun control laws are there. When you go on a traffic stop, you're going to relax because there's no way they could have a gun, right? That's just stupid. Everybody has a gun. And we're all safer and better off if we do. But law enforcement should be trained, and we were. Everybody has a gun. And that the Sheriff's Association could come out and support any kind of gun control law just absolutely floors me. But the National Sheriff's Association does it. The FOP does it. And they tried to get me involved with the FOP. I said, tell them to stop supporting gun control. I'll get involved with them. I'd like to teach them the Constitution for law enforcement. That's a class I teach for law enforcement. Constitution for cops. Constitution for sheriffs. Love to do all of that. So, does anybody have any questions for me? Because I want to make sure that any and all of that get settled. But like I said, as a peace officer, I studied the Constitution, and my chief said only cops and military should have guns. I said, have you ever read the Second Amendment? But I didn't know enough about the Second Amendment to tell him he was wrong. And so I started studying, and it was clear. It's not written. The Second Amendment isn't for cops or military. It's for we the people. The first three words of the Constitution, we the people. And it's by, for, and of us. So thank you so much for having me. I don't get to stay long, but take me home with you tonight. I guarantee you, your children will love these. You'll love them, and they'll bless your life. So thanks so much. I love Las Vegas, and thank you. Oh, wait. One other point. Flood your sheriff's offices with requests for concealed carry permits. Flood them. Yeah. And maybe we can wake up our legislature here and go, constitutional carry. So, yeah, constitutional carry.